Welcome to Seminar Sunday, District 21's weekly episodic webinar series. It's great to have you on the line today for a session on how to be a chief judge. This would be applicable at the club, area, division, or even the district level. It's a great chance to expand your Toastmasters knowledge and support a contest in successful endeavors. This is part of a weekly webinar series. We have quite a number of interesting webinars coming up in the near future here, including things like the role of an area director next week, followed by a lot of great subjects through February, March, and April, and of course, beyond. So please take advantage while you're on the line with us tonight to go ahead and use the chat on the left-hand side. You may also submit a question at the top. And we're happy to kind of interject and work through questions as they come up. Don't be shy and think that it's the wrong time to ask a question. It's a great chance to dive a little bit deeper into whatever topic interests you. And that way we can kind of make this your webinar. All right, so first of all, what are we covering this evening on our webinar? Well, we're covering off these topics. What is a chief judge? Recruiting your team, the paperwork, conducting the briefing, and of course, during the contest. So there's a whole range of things that we'll cover, and if there's a particular topic that you want to dive into deeper, then we'll certainly pause and reflect through that, as we don't necessarily need the whole hour just to strictly go through the content. We definitely want to make this more interesting. So let's start with the chief judge role. The chief judge is also referred to as the chief ballot counter. I like that personally. It's, of course, the official title is chief judge, but you'll even notice in the speech contest rulebook, which I will reference several times during the course of this webinar, that it actually explicitly states that you act as the chief ballot counter during the counting of the ballots. And the role is much more about being the chief ballot counter than the chief judge, because as the chief judge, you don't actually do any judging. You're simply facilitating and leading the team that includes the judges and various other officials through the course of the contest. So that is the important thing to recognize, is that the chief judge is the person who is really the captain of the officials team, as I like to call them, officials team being the judges, the ballot counters, the timers, that kind of side of things that determines, who the winner is, and of course the timing is part of that, because of course if you don't speak long enough or you speak too long, the contestant gets disqualified. The other side of things with the contestant and everything is led by the contest chair. So you're one of two people that work hopefully as a good team to put a contest together, and you're a very critical part of that contest experience as the chief judge. One thing I will mention even before diving into the paperwork is it is absolutely critical that you spend some time prior to serving as chief judge reading through the contest rulebook. It's not nearly as dry as it may appear. It actually is quite interesting, and some things come up through that, but knowledge of the rule book, I would say, is one of the critical skills that you would need to have in order to serve as a chief judge. Recruiting your team. This is a spot that I'd love to spend just a little bit more time on, because I think it's really important that you set yourself up for success from the start. And one of the first actions you would likely do if you're asked to be chief judge is start to work on that team. Now, the team is made up of quite a number of people. You're likely going to have 2 timers, 3 ballot counters, a tie-breaking judge, and 5 voting judges. That is a fair-sized team when you think about it. That means your team is going to be more than 10 people. And that is really for any level of a contest, at least at the club and area level. Division level usually has 7 judges, so you may have an extra couple of people. But generally speaking, that's the size of your team as the chief judge. And you'll be working hand in hand with, once again, that contest chair to facilitate things between the contestants, and maybe there's a calligrapher that's going to help with the certificates of the winners to write the names and everything. Well, of course, they may not be directly part of your team, but they're associated with your team. And same with the sergeant at arms, really, because the sergeant at arms is going to be responsible for, depending on the contest, number one, securing the doors, which is going to be an important impact to the whole contest experience. And number two, if we're dealing with the evaluation or table topics contests, they need to take away those contestants until it's their turn to speak. So all of those roles are absolutely critical to the contest experience, and it's important that you have a two-way dialogue with the contest chair. The tie-breaking judge is also something that is unique and perhaps sometimes misunderstood. The tie-breaking judge, to be really clear, is somebody that only the chief judge knows their identity. So they don't attend the briefing. The contest chair doesn't need to know who they are. Nobody needs to know who they are. If you, as chief judge, know the identity, which hopefully you do, you give them the form. You can brief them in private, let them know what they need to do. And at the end of the contest, go and collect the ballot from them, put that in an envelope, and that envelope is only opened, I emphasize this, opened in a case where there is a tie. And the only use of it at that time is to break a tie. So at no point in time does the tie-breaking judge actually change the overall results. They're just breaking ties. So it could be a tie between first and second. It could be second and third and fourth, whatever it happens to be. They're there to break that tie, and that is their sole purpose. So that is the team. Does anybody have any questions so far about whether it be the team that you'll be recruiting or perhaps something to do with the role of the chief judge? I do have a little bit more on team I'd like to cover off, but I'd love to see if anybody has any questions first. Okay, perhaps I'll just continue on, and then if questions crop up in the meantime, that's perfectly fine. We'll go ahead and kind of go back to those questions as they come in. So what I wanted to mention about the team is how critical it is as well, in particular with the judges, to make sure you have a representation of people that are going to be fair and unbiased. And of course, it's really hard because everybody's got some sort of bias in them. But because there's so many things that can go sideways, I would recommend, if you can, first of all, trying to get somebody from outside your club to be judges. It's a very nice opportunity to talk to a neighboring club and say, hey, can we exchange judges? I'll judge your contest, you come and judge ours. And that way, it, first of all, is a good relationship builder with that neighboring club. But secondly, and perhaps most importantly, at a club contest in particular, if you've delivered a speech several times and now you're going to go ahead and compete with that speech, let's say you've done some practices and now you're actually competing, the judges may be like, oh, I'm kind of bored of this speech, and they're going to mark somebody else higher. And it may not be intentional or something that they're thinking of front of mind. It's just kind of naturally how it evolves based on their experience. Or maybe you get up there and, you know what, it's the best speech, but it's not your best. We've seen you do better. And therefore the judges maybe are marking based on that. So it's really critical, I think, to try where possible to get judges from outside your club, because there's these little things that people don't necessarily think of and realize they're doing. They just end up doing them. And it's, like I said, it's not something that anybody's doing, because of an integrity issue necessarily. And the other thing that can happen is, if they are judging their best friend, they can, of course, judge higher, but more likely what's going to happen, because, most of these people, they have integrity, is they may actually judge their friend harder because they think, oh, well, I don't want to be biased towards them. I don't want to be biased towards them. And then that somehow kind of erodes the way they're voting, and they vote lower than perhaps they really should be because they have that fear that they're going to be perceived as somebody favoring their best friend. So just lots of things to think about there with your team. And of course, if you were doing this at an area level, which is a possibility as well for lots of folks, then you have to make sure that you have equal representation of all the clubs, or ideally, again, you're bringing in people from outside the area. Another great way to exchange. If it's possible, encourage you to do that. If not, then you just work with what you can, of course. But the main thing with all contests is making sure it's a fair playing field, because every contestant deserves a fair opportunity at these contests. And if they're the best person that day, then they should be the winner. So Sean has asked, is it the chief judge's duty to find the people to fill these roles? I think that's going to depend to some degree on the contest that you're actually working with. If you were doing, let's say you were chief judge for a division contest, you may not necessarily have the contacts that you need. So you may be working with a second person. So an example that is relatively common in some areas is, two divisions, they're trading judges, for example. Well, if they're doing that, you may just be working with the division director for the other division to get some names rounded up for judges. You may be working with the contest chair. If it's in your club, the main thing you'll need to do is make sure, of course, they're not a contestant before asking them to be a judge and or other official. So it comes down to communication with the chair again, really. The chair is welcome to help you build your team. The one thing I would make sure you do, though, is number one, check and ensure you have people lined up, whether that's through somebody else or yourself. And kind of part B of that is to make sure you select the tie-breaking judge, because once again, only you should know that person's identity, and it's important for the whole process that they're anonymous. Seeing no other questions, I'll carry on, but please don't be afraid to interject with questions anytime they come up. We're getting into kind of the paperwork section now of the contest, and there is a fair amount of paperwork. Toastmasters International, if you go to toastmasters.org, provides you the kits, so you can actually go and download a whole file folder full of materials, including your contests and all the other documents, completely free, and then print it off. Or you can also pay Toastmasters International for a printed kit in the mail, and it's got all the forms you should need. Just watch the amount of forms that you have, because they do print out things based on a certain number of contestants and judges. And if you have more or less, then you just need to be aware of how many versions of the document you're getting, just to avoid showing up with too few forms. The single most important document that you're going to have is going to be the speech contest rulebook. It is very important to understand that this rulebook is not just a rulebook, but it's actually protocol for Toastmasters International in the governing documents, which means that this is not only the rules, really, but it's almost like the bylaws of our organization to some degree. It's so critical that we follow this. And if anybody ever tries to argue a rule, this book is always right. It will never, ever be wrong. So you can always throw that in somebody's face if they were saying to you, hey, this is the rule. Well, the rule book says the opposite. So you can't interpret it. It's just like one common thing, for example, right now, is eligibility. And I'm glad we were actually kind of segueing into this naturally, because this wasn't a distinct category that we included. Eligibility for all speech contests requires members to be in good standing in a club that's in good standing. So they have to have paid up their dues. That's number one for all contests. The international speech contest has an additional criteria that someone has completed 6 speeches in the Competent Communicator Manual, or they have completed 2 levels in pathways. The wording needs to be taken literally. Toastmasters International did make a mistake. They meant to put level 2 in pathways, but because they've put 2 levels, that means you can complete 2 level 1s in 2 separate paths and qualify for the international speech contest. So this is where, even though the intention may have been different, we follow the rule book as per the words, and that's perfectly fine. Whereas if we decline somebody to compete in the international speech contest because they didn't have a level 2, but they had 2 level 1s, we would be in a position that's a little bit awkward because, of course, they should have been allowed to compete based on this year's rulebook. Next year's rulebook may have different rules, and that is the thing. Every year they do change the rules, and if you read cover to cover one year, you don't necessarily need to read cover to cover the next year because they actually put a little star next to all the rule changes that have happened since the prior year. So if you go and read through those stars, you'll actually be able to capture all of the changes. So as long as your memory's fresh on the rules, which can be challenging, of course, when you're only doing these contests once a year, then you just need to update every year, and there's not a lot of changes, handful or so every year. Other documents that are going to be very important is going to be the certifications. So there's judges and speakers certification that are required from all contestants and judges. So the contestants need to fill out the speaker certification of eligibility and originality. Obviously, the originality only really matters when it's a prepared speech contest, but absolutely they have to sign that they are eligible, and that includes things like, you know, I'm not in a district officer position, I'm not this, that, and the other that makes you ineligible to compete, because I've given you those 2 pieces that are eligibility, which of course is member in good standing, and then the special requirements for the international speech contest. But there is other things that make people ineligible to compete. So an example would be somebody that's on the board of directors or a district officer, any type of role where you've got an elevated exposure to the membership prevents you from competing for a certain period of time. The judge's certification is all about your eligibility to be a judge, and of course your code of ethics, which you're signing off that you're going to be fair and all of that. So those are important documents to make sure that are received back from the speakers and judges. What I love to do, and I'd highly recommend this for yourselves as well, if at all possible, is giving this to people before the contest and asking them either to bring it to the contest, or they could send you a signed copy just before the contest by email or something. So you've got it and you're ready to go. Instead of, I find a lot of times it's a little bit chaotic at the start of a contest because people are trying to get paperwork done and they're trying to get a briefing done, and it just ends up being really rushed and kind of a feeling of chaos before the contest starts. So one step like that where you get the paperwork completed ahead of time means that when people come, they just need to be briefed, and away you go with your contest. Highly recommended. I mean, obviously it's not going to work in every single case, and that is also dependent on people sending stuff to you or coming prepared with the materials, but it's worth a shot, especially for contest chairs. There's a profile that speakers fill out, and it's relatively time consuming. Because there's a number of boxes, their name and interests and favorite quote and those types of things. So just a recommendation when you're working with the chair is talk about, hey, could we maybe send the paperwork in advance and get them to bring it with them? And I did see a question pop up here. Josanna asked how many levels does each path from pathway have and how many speeches per path? So Sean has responded that every path has 5 levels, and there are 14 projects, and not all projects are speeches. There's 10 required projects, and then there's 4 electives, I believe, per path. What perhaps you're curious about is how many speeches per level as well. So the level 1 has 4 speeches. 4 speeches and a speech evaluation that you need to complete in order to complete level 1. So you need to do that twice, or you do level 1, which is the 4 speeches, plus level 2, which is 3 projects. I believe it's 3 speeches as well, if I remember correctly. It's hard to remember. I just know how it goes by very fast, these levels. So it's relatively equivalent. And just on a sidebar note, level 3 is usually the requirement for an advanced club if you wanted to seek admission to an advanced club. Yeah, absolutely, Sean. I agree that it's much easier if people can fill it out electronically, send it back, or print it out and bring it to the contest. Whatever they can do, basically, to eliminate filling out things in the contest room is very beneficial, especially for judges who are supposed to be anonymous. And of course, we've all seen, if you've been to a speech contest, at least you've probably seen examples where the judge is kind of obvious, but we're supposed to try and keep it as anonymous as possible. There's, of course, the judging forms, and do note there is a difference in forms as well between the judges' form themselves and the tie-breaking judges' form. And the only difference is at the bottom. You'll notice that the judges' ballot has first, second, and third place, which there's points allocated for each place. So the ballot counters are going to take that into the back. They're going to give 3 points to every third place winner, 3 points to every first place winner, 2 points to every second place, and 1 point to every third place. The tie-breaking judge, on the other hand, you'll see at the bottom of the form there, it has first place all the way through to 10th place. So it is a little bit more cumbersome and time-consuming, of course, because that tie-breaking judge literally has to pick everyone from that contest and place them in order. So that is a huge, huge undertaking for that individual. But of course, it is critical that that is submitted all the way through to the end, because you could have, from the tie-breaking judge's perspective, maybe, the winner and second place were 9 and 10 on their opinion. You need to go all the way down to 9 and 10 then to break that tie. And also, just keep in mind there is, we're going to come up with this in just a moment, but there's a notification of contest winner form. And that needs to be completed all the way through as well, because you may find, for example, let's say, you had an amazing club contest and there was 10 contestants all vying for a spot at the area contest. Area contest comes up and most people can't make it. The date just doesn't work. Then that area director could be going all the way, even potentially the bottom of the list of your club contestants to take somebody to compete. So just keep in mind that even because somebody doesn't necessarily place in the top 3, they could still be competing at the area contest. It's not often that would happen, but it does happen. And finally, note that on the tie-breaking judge's ballot, there is no points allocation whatsoever. So again, it's to break a tie, and that's the sole purpose of the tie-breaking judge. Please make sure they sign their ballot. Any ballot that's not signed is invalid. And if your tie-breaking judge's ballot isn't invalid, then you're really in an awkward spot when there's a tie. So that would be number one. I would watch them sign just to make sure. There's other important forms as well that you'll see in a contest. There's the counters tally sheet, which you'll be using in the back room at the conclusion of the contest to determine the winner. There is the time record sheet, which you will be collecting from the timers as soon as the contest concludes. Evaluation contestant notes. Please note this is in the rulebook. They must use this form to write their notes in the evaluation speech contest. They cannot use their own loose leaf or other paper. So that is really critical to note because it is in the rulebook, which means it is part of protocol of Toastmasters International. And I think it is sometimes a misconception. They can have multiple sheets of this, though. They don't have to limit themselves to one sheet. I think that was in last year or the year before's rulebook. It can be multiple evaluation contestant note sheets, but it's just to keep it safe in case people try to bring their own paper, which has, little cheat sheets on it or something. And finally, that notification of contest winner form that we talked about just a few moments ago. Again, critical to list first all the way through to 10th, if that's how many contestants you had, and send that on to whoever's running the next level of contest. So if you're at the club, you'd send it to the area, and if you're at the area, you send it to the division, and the division sends it to myself. And then, of course, for the international speech contest, I'll send this on to the fantastic team at World Headquarters that runs the quarterfinals. Any questions about forms? I've got something here from Sean, but please, if you do have any questions about the forms, send them in right now, and let's look at Sean's question while we're waiting. Can the chief judge / ballot counter take the tie-breaking ballot back to the tie-breaking judge to sign it if necessary? That is probably what I would actually do if they did not sign it. I would find a way to kind of sneak in and get them to sign, get their attention and get them to sign it, because otherwise you are in a very awkward spot because you can't take their results without a signature and you've got a tie to break. Here we go. So the briefing. This is, of course, the first time you're really going to be working with your team face-to-face and covering off their roles and responsibilities during the conduct of the contest. It's a real critical time, and before they arrive, I recommend doing a couple things. Number one is actually getting them to watch the speech contest tutorials on Toastmasters.org. If you go to, this is the great thing about Toastmasters.org as well. You can follow this link that I put on the screen, or you can just write down the steps to get there, and it's the exact same. So if you go to Toastmasters.org, you click on Leadership Central, you click on Speech Contest, then there's a Speech Contest tutorials. Or you can, of course, just put this in to your address bar, and you'll get directly to this page that I've provided a screenshot to. Great tutorials. There's lots of information on running a speech contest right on the Toastmasters.org website, and I highly recommend getting your judging team especially to review this and come prepared, aware of what their duties are. There was a fantastic story I heard some time ago from past international president Pat Johnson as well, regarding actually doing judges training before the contest. So you could get your judges to come extra early as well, and perhaps you could spend extra time going through the criteria on the judging forms, and maybe even do a mock, watch a video of a past world champion and kind of just discuss, how people did, what they didn't do, etc., and just kind of make sure that everybody's calibrated, because the worst thing about speech contests, my biggest fear in them anyways, is, we walk out and you hear people complaining about the result. And, it can be a number of things. It can be, of course, that we just disagree. We thought somebody was better. Or it could truly be that the judges did not do the right job. And, of course, there's the third element, which is, maybe the person that did the best got disqualified. I saw that a couple of years ago happen, and it was so disappointing to see, because this person I thought was a serious contender to even take the district championship, and this was at a division level I watched, and they went over time, so very disappointing, but something to keep in mind when you disagree with the results is it could have been a disqualification as well. So that's before the briefing. I would get them to either watch this, or you bring them in for some more training extra early if that's a possibility, or even if it's a club contest the week before, you could perhaps just run an overall, hey, we're going to do the speech contest. Here's what it's going to look like. Let's spend some time on that. During the briefing, first of all, make sure you've got the rule book. Make sure that you point out any important bits from the rule book that are important. I would issue people a rule book if you can, if you've got a way to have printed versions there in person, or at least available to people to reference if they wanted to flip through and look at a few things. or you send them the link in advance, and they can bring a tablet or something and have the rule book loaded up. Especially important because the judges and the contestants are the only ones that can file a protest. And if they don't know what the rule is, it's going to be very challenging for them to file a protest. Of course, it's only on originality and eligibility, but it's still important that they're aware. Another tool that I found really helpful, there's some amazing different scripts on the internet. You search Google for chief judge briefing scripts or anything along those lines, and you will find some fantastic scripts that you can actually use. And that's personally what I'll probably be using for not the chief judge, because I'm not doing the chief judge, but I will be the contest chair for the district contests. And I will likely take one of those great scripts offline, print them offline and use them, because they are just, they make sure you don't miss anything. That's always the biggest fear, right? Is that you're going to miss an important point. And, you can know the rules in and out, but it's easy to forget that one thing that is actually important. Biggest rule, I think, that doesn't get talked about with contestants or judges is the speaking area. That's important to let people know, because there should be a certain area. For example, let's say it's on a stage. All right, well, if somebody gets off the stage, what are you going to do? Well, you're not going to disqualify them, because the rule book doesn't say you can disqualify for that. But the judges are probably going to mark against their space usage because they've went outside the speaking area. So just things like that to consider. And that will, of course, be especially important. We talked about at the district level, because we'll be filming and we can't pan the camera. That's one of the rules, is we are unable to pan the camera if you're competing at the district. So if we put the camera on the speaking area only, and you go outside the speaking area, and let's say you win the district contest, well, you're not going to do very well in the quarterfinals, because the judges judging the video aren't going to see you for a portion of that speech. My favorite script I found for judges briefing is from District 90 in Australia. So if you search for Google for District 90 Chief Judge Briefing script, you will find it, and it's a fantastic little PDF document. Talks about not only just things to do before you do your briefing, but also how to brief the timers, how to brief the ballot counters, how to brief the judges. And I like that, because it breaks it out separately rather than just, oh, here's the briefing and away you go. It actually recognizes the importance of giving them the information they need to know. Any questions about the briefing process? The rulebook actually does also, on, I believe it's page 22 of the rulebook, have the kind of topics that you should cover off during the briefing. So it's not a script per se. It doesn't give you a word for word, here's what you're supposed to say type thing, but it actually covers off, well, here are the topics that you should be covering during the briefing. And it also has the contest chairs, of course. So if you're working with somebody that's maybe a newer contest chair and they're a little bit nervous about what they're walking into, it's a great thing to reference them to the rule book. And of course, once again, Google has scripts for things like briefings. And they're probably better than I would necessarily create. I'm not going to lie, they're great. Yeah, so there's a checklist. It's actually, sorry, page 23. I just looked it up to verify. So 22, at the very end of 22, it moves into the chief judge's checklist. So 23 is more valid to what you should cover off in the briefing. Any questions at all? People are pretty quiet tonight. All right, well, we'll keep trucking along, and if questions pop up during the session, then just we'll pause and move along with them. No problem at all. So now you've conducted your briefing, and the contest is about to start. a rule of thumb with the speech contest that I've read in different sources actually is from the time the gavel hits the lectern to the time your first speaker is up should be less than 5 minutes. So if you're planning a speech contest and you're the chief judge, you're working very closely with the contest chair, I would just make sure that you guys discuss things like that. Okay, what are the timelines? So then you have an idea to what's expected of you when it comes to, you know, counting the ballots and dealing with anything that comes as a result of that. This is mainly from the speech contest rulebook directly, your responsibilities during the contest. So the chief judge should never have to get up and go over the rules with the audience. That's something I see very common at certain contests in certain geographic regions, it seems to, of District 21. It's not at all. There's nowhere in the rule book that says that the chief judge needs to get up and do any type of briefing of the audience. And let's remember here, as chief judge, you have already explained all the rules and everything that they need to know to the judges, the ballot counters, and the timers. The chair has talked to the sergeant at arms and the contestants. So the other people in the room are just audience members watching a speech contest. The contest chair can let them know about things like timing and speaking order. They don't need to know who, well, I mean, you could mention who can lodge protests. They need to be aware of, you know, don't take photos or videos unless, you know, for videos unless it's given, prior approval's been given. And that's it. They really don't need to know any other details about what the rules of the contest are because it's not applicable to them. So just keep that in mind that your role is to confirm that you have briefed the officials, and that's all, really. That's the only speaking that the chief judge needs to do at the actual speech contest. At the end, when the contest finishes, you'll be collecting 2 documents that are solely your responsibility for collecting: the time record sheet and the tie-breaking judge's ballot. The other ballots can be collected by the ballot counters, but those 2 documents are your responsibility. Make sure you go back to the counting area with time and the tie-breaking judge ballot. So time, you'll do a quick scan of as soon as you can, see what kind of times people landed with, and you'll be able to identify very quickly whether there's been disqualifications. And of course, the tie-breaking judge ballot, just make sure, once again, that only gets open in the event of a tie, so you're just holding on to it in case that happens. During the period, once you went back to the ballot counting area, this is the most likely time that you will see some sort of protest being lodged. And I have seen this at the semifinals, actually. A number of years ago, I saw this happen at one of the semifinal contests. So people that were competing to move to the World Championship of Public Speaking. And they actually, I believe that the judge just wrote the protest, maybe it was just the word protest even, on the ballot itself. So we had a process in place at that time, and I guess this is a spoiler in some way, shape, or form. We had a process that if there was some sort of protest or dispute over anything about the contest, we would call the judges to the back of the room, and we used a specific word for that. So I think we said, can the point person please come to the back of the room? And that meant, can the judges come to the back of the room? And we worked through the protest there. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment, but I wanted to highlight that as you know, a red flag. That is the time you're likely going to see some sort of protest arise, if one comes. And then basically you oversee the counting. So the ballot counters are going to go through, hopefully twice, just to make sure no mistakes have been made, and that will determine who your winner is. The ballots combined with the time record sheet will determine 1, 2, and 3, and that's where the calligrapher kind of takes over. There's also a sheet that I didn't talk about earlier, and I've seen it around I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's actually a sheet for results. It's a results form. And so what the chief judge does is they write, third, second, first, and then time disqualification's got a box to check yes or no. So that's really easy. You just pass that to the chair. They've got the information they need to proceed with announcing the results. And I did see a question. So Sean has asked, would you allow a judge to judge if they didn't attend the judge's briefing? I don't think it would be suitable. I think the best, once again, you're always going to have exceptions where, something comes up that forces your hand, that, it's either this person has to do it or the contest isn't happening. But where possible, I certainly would not put somebody in a judging role without a briefing, even if they've got experience, because you don't necessarily know how fresh their experience is and whether they've had proper briefings. They don't know where the speaking area is, which is going to impact their judging ability. So there's a lot of things that they could miss out on the briefing. So I would say that would be a requirement. Once again, though, if there was a fire or something, you've got to roll with what you can work with. But I would make that a requirement for sure. Josanna, you're asking about the pathways then. Do we get a certificate after the completion of each level? Yes, a member would download their own certificate though. So once they complete whatever the level happens to be, and the Basecamp manager signs off that they've completed that level, they can go back into whatever level it is and actually view their certificate. And then of course they can print it if they want to as well. Okay, I'll move along here to the protest then, and then we'll have lots of time for questions after that. So with protests, how this is going to work is, once again, you are going to see a protest more than likely between the time the ballots have been collected and the announcement of the results. It is important, though, that the results, once they're announced, are final. So nobody can launch a protest then, which is all the more reason why you're going to see it during that time, because that's the only time really that somebody can launch any type of protest. So make sure you are looking at those ballots for any notes, because like I said, saw it at the semifinals where that was literally the indication was, they put, they had a protest and away we went. What we did at the internationals, and I recommend looking into this as well for, even area above, maybe it's not as necessary in a club level, just to say, hey, could the point person come to the back, or some other terminology. I've been involved as a contest official a number of times at the international level and have only the one time seen that where there's been an actual code word, and I liked it because I thought that's a real nice way to, to not go and say, can the judges come to the back of the room? It was, no, we want this person. And of course, to the audience, who the heck is a point person? What does that mean? And of course, because it was being recorded, they probably thought, oh, maybe it's something to do with the recording or something. So in that case, we met with all the judges, found out what the concern was, talked to them about it, talked to the contestant. You could do that at the same time, although there's some challenge there when you're doing it together. You could kind of do almost like an interview separately, but then the issue is, well, really it should be you with the judges making a decision, not just you making a decision. And then depending on what the scenario happens to be, you could have a vote with the judges, and that could be a paper vote or or another type of vote. It doesn't have to be a paper vote. It could just be raising the hands. But if it is a paper vote, then you just get them to sign their name on it and write disqualified or not disqualified, or whatever language helps you identify the way that they feel at that moment. And then based on that, a determination is made, they're disqualified. But it is important to, first of all, find out what the concern is, and it needs to be validated. So, if somebody says, well, that's not original. Okay, well, do you have, and this is the tough part, do you have proof that it's not original? And that was exactly what happened in this particular case that I dealt with a couple of years ago. And, you had to do like an online search or something to try and find what it was and go with that, basically. Okay, so we found that content online, or we didn't, and there's nothing else. It's just, you're saying it's not original, but there's no proof. Then there's not really a case to stand on in that case. But it is important that those are handled, respectfully and professionally, and unfortunately also quickly, because the audience is waiting for results at that point in time, and obviously it becomes pretty clear pretty quick that something's happening when there's a delay in getting the results. But it's not like you can come back the next day and have a decision. It has to be relatively fast paced. So that's why having that key word set with your judges to get them back into the counting room as quickly as possible and start working on solutioning is probably going to be your best approach to hopefully not slow down things too much. So there is no official rules per se on there's no script on how to handle a protest or exact steps anywhere that I've seen. So it is more or less just, what is the most fair way to handle this? And of course, judges being involved is important. It's not just up to you to decide. So that's why I'm suggesting, get the judges out there, and you probably have to get the contestant in front of the judges as well, just so everybody gets the same story from the contestant, because they have their ability to, respond as well to the concern. Because if you're going to say, well, you're not original, then, they deserve an explanation of how, and then a chance to defend themselves. So that is protests. Hopefully that doesn't come up very often, but when it does come up, it's a great chance once again to really practice your leadership skills and help deliver a fair contest, regardless of the outcome, whether or not you disqualify a person as a result, or whether you say, you know what, this can't be proved. Let's move on and get the results out there. One final thought on protests, though. Before you start dealing with a protest, check how much time they have used in their speech. If they have been disqualified for time, it's not worth going down the protest route. Just they're out anyways. Move along. You may want to touch base with them later and say, hey, this concern's been raised, so they're aware for future reference. But absolutely not worth holding everybody up and results up if they're not going to be moving on anyways. Any questions or thoughts on any of the topics that we've covered this evening? Susanna's come up with a question here about the protests. Is it any member or only judges who can protest? For example, if a member notices that one of the speeches is not original, can he or she speak up? So here's the thing about speech contest protests. It's a yes/no, which I've learned is actually a terminology that they use in Afrikaans. It's kind of a funny one. Yes/no, though, what I mean by it is they can't officially raise the protest. But what a member in the audience can do is they can, talk to a contestant, for example, and say, hey, I heard this before somewhere. And that contestant can raise it. So the only people that can officially raise it to a chief judge is the contestant or a judge. Theoretically, nobody knows who the judges are, but everybody's going to know who the contestants are. So somebody could go raise it to a contestant, and the contestant could raise it. There's nothing officially blocking that. So if somebody felt very strongly, they could do that, but they cannot go to the chief judge themselves and say, hey, I want to raise a protest. So only the judges and the contestants. And it has to be for that contest as well. So just something that I know people sometimes lump contests together, the evaluation and the international speech contest, for example. We run those together, essentially, like especially at the club, area, and division level. You're going to run them back to back. It feels like one contest with just two different sets of players, but they are two different contests. So a contestant from one contest could not, do a protest over the other contest. It has to be a contest they're competing in. The other requirement that I didn't cover off earlier, because I tried to focus a lot on club and area contests, but if for some reason you find yourself in a position where you're doing this for a division or a district, do be aware that the judges cannot be from a club that is being represented by a contestant. So if club ABC had a contestant, nobody from that club can judge, regardless equal representation or not. You must find people from other clubs to judge that contest. And that is a firm rule. That's something that they sign on the judge's certification as well, that they're not from a club that's competing, division level or higher. Just keep in mind, back to that whole thing, that they are two separate contests, though. If you have a contestant competing in the evaluation contest, but not the international, then you can judge the international, but not the evaluation. So I've seen that done too with judges before, where you'll judge only one of the two contests for that very reason, because you're not eligible to judge one, but you can judge the other. And maybe somebody from the other club can help you judge in the evaluation contest then. A little bit more work. I find it a bit easier personally to get somebody that can judge both, but when you're in a pinch, that is a solution, is getting people to judge just one of the two contests. Okay, well, you know what? If anybody has any more questions, then please feel free to always send them through to me. I'm more than happy to discuss anything to do with speech contest, whether it be chief judge in this case, or if you had questions from the contest chair, or even as a contestant. I am happy to be a resource to you. And I absolutely love being involved with speech contests. It's a great experience for all. It's a lot of fun, and with them coming up soon, it's all the more exciting. Your club contest you'll want to run probably towards the end of this month or early next month. Area contests will be happening by March 15th. Division contest will be on March 29th. And of course, the district level contest will be April 12th to the 14th at the the Cascades Casino Resort in Langley at the District 21 Annual Conference. And for whoever wins that, they will be judged on the video. Should they be one of the quarterfinalists, they will be invited, the winner of the quarterfinals rather, they'll be invited to compete in the semifinals this August in Denver, Colorado. So my email contact is on the screen. It's mbound21@gmail.com, mbound21@gmail.com. Happy to answer any questions by email, or we can always set up a phone call as well. That's never a big deal to do. And I'm going to put a link to the conference in the chat there. Have a fantastic night, and we will catch you, hopefully, very soon on another Seminar Sunday. Take care.